Hello, S.E. Whitmore School students. I'm Mr. Cannon, and I'm here to introduce our new unit, Jacksonian Democracy and Manifest Destiny. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this movement is the age of Jackson. We're talking about Jacksonian democracy and the age of Jackson. We're talking about Andrew Jackson. You can see him there on the picture on the right. So Andrew Jackson, who was a force in our politics and who's going to change a lot about who gets to vote and what kind of people vote, a lot about our economy, and he's going to lead us into some pretty negative situations with Native Americans. And you'll learn all about that in this unit. We're also going to be looking at manifest destiny, and that's the what the image on the left really shows there. Manifest destiny was the idea that the United States was destined pretty much by God, is what the belief was, destined by God, by fate, to be a continental nation or a nation from Atlantic to Pacific. At this time, the United States barely goes to the Mississippi River. And most people live right on the east coast of the United States, right in the original 13 colonies area. But we did have some that lived west of the Appalachian Mountains along the Mississippi River. But out west of that, didn't have any settlements yet. And so what we're going to see is manifest destiny, the belief that it is America's destiny to own that land, to settle that land, and eventually to make that land into different states that will be part of the United States. Of course, that's part of westward expansion. And the Lewis and Clark expedition had a lot to do with that, which you learned about in the last unit. So that's what we're going to be covering in this unit. Now, the skill we're going to be learning about in this unit is the skill of comparison. Now, we've actually covered this skill in previous units, but I wanted to give a little bit different example in this unit of how we're going to use this skill. And the example I wanted to use is the two images you see there on your screen, the image of the gamecock and the Clemson tiger. Now, we could do a lot of things when comparing these two images. We can actually look at similarities of the two universities. So we could say, well, they're both universities in South Carolina. We could go back in history and actually contrast some things about them because that's part of comparison as well. We could say that South Carolina, the University of South Carolina, was established first. It was established as a university, a college for the elites to begin with. Um, Whereas we could say Clemson was established later as an agricultural school by Ben Tillman and his group. It was more for the common, it was more a school for the common man. Of course, that's not the case today necessarily. It's still an agricultural school, but Clemson is actually a very elite school today. But when we compare, we can also contrast it. Another thing we can do is look at the athletic programs. We can compare those and how the success that each have had or have not had. We can compare the students that go to these two schools. One school, University of South Carolina, is a little bit bigger than Clemson, has a little more students. So we can compare all of that and contrast all of that. But not only do we compare and contrast specific characteristics of both schools or even the history of both schools or the athletic program of both schools, but these images actually even elicit certain emotions and beliefs from us. So some of you may see that image of the gamecock and it elicits pride and joy as you are maybe a fan of South Carolina. Maybe your parents graduated from South Carolina. I graduated from the University of South Carolina. So it does elicit that. For others of you, it may elicit nothing at all, or it may even elicit negative feelings about South Carolina because maybe your parents, or someone you know went to Clemson, or maybe you're just a fan of the Clemson Tigers. And so when you see that Carolina image, it does something to you. Well, the same thing will be true for the image of Clemson. Some of you have pride in that image and some of you don't. But all of those beliefs and feelings that come from those beliefs have a place in comparison. They actually matter. It matters, for instance, if I were to get even more controversial, forget Carolina Clemson, what if I put the image of the last two presidents up on the screen? So I put the image of President Joe Biden and the image of President Donald Trump. That is going to elicit specific emotions as well and beliefs as well. And we can compare those, but in comparing them, our beliefs about them and our biases and the things that we learned about them in our homes, that certainly is going to matter in how we when we're comparing them because I view it one way and you may view it completely different. Certainly, guys, that's the case in US history. Certainly, that's the case in all things with US history. So, when we're talking about the age of Jackson and we're talking about Jacksonian democracy and manifest destiny, some groups in America are going to see it one way and maybe have one experience with that, and other groups are going to have a very different experience. Some groups may view it positively and actually have a positive experience, and other groups are going to have a very negative experience with it. So when we're talking about the unit skill comparison, those things matter as well. It's not just looking at characteristics of Carolina and Clemson or the universities. It's actually digging deeper into how do I view, how do certain groups view Carolina, and how do certain groups view Clemson. So that all matters as well, especially when we're talking about U.S. history. Now, our project for this unit is going to be a graphic organizer. The style is your choice. So over there on the right of your screen, that's just an example of a kind of graphic organizer. You can do whatever graphic organizer you would like to do that you feel best would set up your thoughts and your research here. But in your graphic organizer, you're going to have to uh, compare and contrast the effects of Jacksonian democracy and manifest destiny on these three groups: poor white Americans, slaves, and free African Americans, which are really two different groups, but we're putting them together because the effects of or the effects of Jacksonian democracy are going to be similar for both of those groups. And then Native Americans. Now, the required information here. You do have to explain the effects of manifest destiny on daily life of each group. You've got to explain the effects of manifest destiny on economic opportunities for each group. You got to describe the political opportunities that developed or didn't for each group as a result of the Jacksonian democracy, as a result of opening up new ways to vote, new people to vote. Four, how did each group likely view the changes that were occurring? And that could be mixed. Maybe they like some of the changes and didn't like others. In some cases, they're not going to like any of the changes. And then how did each group impact changes that happened during the period? How did poor white Americans impact the changes that happened during this period? What was their role in those changes? What was the role of slaves and free African Americans in the changes during the period? What was the role of Native Americans in the changes that happened during the period? So that's the fifth part, and that's a very key. 4 and 5 are key parts to do. Um, the first three is basically you just doing research on what those changes were. Of course, this information is going to be covered in the unit, but you also need to do outside research. So make sure you do outside research and cite your sources, cite your source or your sources for that research. Definitely, though, you're going to find a lot of this information in the actual lessons in the unit. At the end of the day, you're going to be doing a graphic organizer. It can be virtual, it can be a digital graphic organizer, or it can be physical one that you write on paper. If you do it on paper, you have to actually take a picture of it and upload it that way. Um, Always consult your teacher about any questions about the project, and they'll be glad to help you out with it. If you have me, it's Mr. Cannon. You could have another teacher, but reach out to that whatever teacher you have. Let's talk about the rubric real quick. So the rubric, you got 60 points, 75 points, 90 points, 100 points. Let's look at the 100-point one. That's what we always like to look at because that's what we're shooting for. You got to compare multiple characteristics or perspectives, how it impacted historical events over time, place, and culture during the age of Jackson and Manifest Destiny. So we're looking at those different groups and their perspectives and how they impacted events over time, place, and culture. How did those groups impact the changes that occurred? Analyze the reasons for similarities and differences in perspectives. So why did poor white settlers have different perspective about Jacksonian democracy than Native Americans did? That's going to be pretty obvious, but you got to analyze that. Analyze the reasons for that. Draw conclusions about how differing characteristics or perspectives contributed to historical developments during the age of Jackson. So, how did the differing perspectives about the age of Jackson, how did that contribute to future historical developments? Did things happen in the future as a result of how poor whites viewed the age of Jackson or how Native Americans viewed the age of Jackson? And then provide evidence from multiple sources to justify your comparisons. So multiple sources, if you just do one source, that would be 90 points. You do two sources, that's part of getting 100. You got to do multiple sources, at least two or more. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to your teacher. It's me, reach out to Mr. Cannon, reach out to any other teacher, and we'll be happy to help you, go over anything with you. You've seen this at the beginning of the unit. It's not due until the end of the unit, like all of our projects. When you get to the end of the unit, there'll be a place for you to work and turn it in. But you can work on this throughout. That's why we put it at the beginning. If you want to work on it throughout the unit while you're doing the other lessons, that's fine as well. Have a great day.